and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today, I want to I want to broach an issue with, and some people get very sensitive about this, but I want to broach the issue of how we talk about literature, and it's something I've talked about before: confusing preferences with evaluative criteria about what is good. And the reason I want to talk about this is there are a couple or a few arguments that get made that are framed as criticisms of writing, framed as criticisms of novels, framed as criticisms of narrative, that the premise that the criticism is based on is fundamentally flawed. And none of this is to say that if you have a stated preference, that your preference is wrong. You can prefer whatever type of narrative that you want. And the reason I bring this up, if I said, I really enjoy spy action thrillers, this book was not a spy action thriller, therefore this book was bad, everyone would look at me and go, you're an idiot. Because that is an idiotic statement to make. Because the book is not bad simply because it did not match what I wanted. The two things are entirely separate. And also, if I then said, this book would be better if it had been a spy action thriller, then also people would go, well, why? That wasn't what the book was. Why are you insisting it should be a spy action thriller? It was a romantic comedy. And the thing is, what we know from statements like that is it's not that the person generally means that thing. What they mean is, I would have enjoyed it more. And you go, and that is absolutely fine. But when we speak about these things, when we try to advance arguments, when we use platforms like YouTube or Twitter or anything like that to talk about books, it's, I think, important to say what we mean and not necessarily have people try to guess what we mean. And so saying, I did not like this book, perfectly fine. Saying, this book is bad because I didn't like it, idiotic. Like, the quality of the novel is not decided by whether or not we like it. Certainly, a really well-written novel, a really well-constructed novel, a really engaging novel, all of those things can hopefully make us enjoy it, but that is to do with our enjoyment, not the book itself. So I wanted to talk about a couple of these things that perennially come up. And one of the criticisms that I have heard a lot, there shouldn't be politics in narrative. Now, I'm not going to strawman this because I'm going to give a variant of it, which will be more specific. But there shouldn't be politics in narrative, in fiction, in film, in television. And fundamentally, I, of course, disagree with this. And the reason being, sometimes I think this is being said when people are not being clear what they mean by politics, and they're including some things as political when at other times they're not applying that universally to a different expression of the same thing. And again, I'm going to go into all of this, but the two statements that I want to examine, there shouldn't be politics in narrative, or there shouldn't be modern politics in narrative. And the reason I'm giving both is because, oh, well, politics is fine, you know, but not modern politics. And so the first thing we need to do here is think about, what do we mean by politics? Because while we all use the term, politics is a very flexible and plastic term that applies to a lot of different things. So for instance, let's say you have a fantasy story in which a romance develops between two characters, and those characters are heterosexual, So there's a male and a female. People go, yeah, well, that's fine. That's normal. Now, if we change one of those characters to be the same sex as the other, so it's now a homosexual romance, there are certain people who'd say, well, that's putting modern politics in. Well, we haven't changed the thing. The thing that is being described is a romance between two characters. So you're not objecting in the sense of, well, this is now political. It is only political if you believe that the inclusion of a homosexual character is a political statement. And if the inclusion of a homosexual character is a political statement, then the inclusion of a heterosexual character is a political statement because it is then affirming a perceived norm, heterosexuality, as opposed to a perceived uh, movement away from the norm, homosexuality. So if the inclusion of homosexuality is being viewed as political, not including homosexuality should also be considered as political. And that simple basic logic. If we say there shouldn't be modern politics, again, let's think about what we mean by modern politics. Is it okay to have a novel like, well, I don't know, George Orwell's 1984, in which that is criticizing a lot of politics? It's criticizing political ideology. It's criticizing government overreach. It is heavily focused on politics. And of course, people say, ah, yeah, but that's not modern politics. But it was modern when it was released. Just because we are now in a position past the time it was released, we are in Orwell's future, doesn't mean that when it was released, it wasn't dealing with contemporary politics. So why is it okay for a novel like 1984 to have been written, which dealt with contemporary social, political, and ideological issues, for that novel to be considered great, and yet an author today trying to do the same thing, to talk about political, ideological, or social issues, is now considered, you're not meant to do that. It is applying a double standard. And this is the difficulty I have with this argument. It is not that people have to enjoy. If you don't like it, you don't like it, that's fine. If you like it, that's fine. But it is saying, making a declarative statement, politics shouldn't be in narrative, or modern politics shouldn't be in narrative. That is what I disagree with, because every story created is created by someone living in a moment in time. And their politics, their ideologies, their socioeconomic status, their culture, all of these things will influence a myriad of decisions within the narrative. And it's not necessarily that a narrative is a close reflection of the author's contemporary situation. That would be overstating it. But the author's contemporary situation is going to influence how they express that story. And so if a story has engaged with or is including elements of politics for the broadest possible concept of politics, then it's not that inclusion that is the issue. It might be, and hear me out here, is it the inclusion of the issue or that it was badly done? I want you to think about this just for a second. We can look at Orwell's 1984 and go, oh, this was great and it explored all of these things and it was really interesting. You go, yeah, that's it being well done. You go, oh, but this was bad because blah, 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 blah. And you go, it's not the inclusion of the thing that was bad, it's that it was badly done. And as soon as you reduce it to that, well, yeah, characters are bad if they are badly done. Plot and story And narrative events are bad if they are badly done. That that is self-explanatory. If something is done badly, it is not good. It is not whether or not the thing in and of itself is a bad thing. It has been done badly. And that's the issue that I keep coming up against when I hear people make this argument. And it's confusing the symptom for the cause, or confusing a type when it's really a problem with the execution. And it's usually quite often tied to confusing a personal preference for a universal criteria. That is where I have an issue with this statement that modern politics shouldn't be in fiction. This is meant to be a fantasy story. Why does it include modern politics? Raymond D. Feist's Magician in the 1980s had feminist politics attributed to the male characters so they wouldn't seem like chauvinistic assholes. Even though it didn't fit with the world, it didn't fit with the characters' upbringing, it didn't fit with the psychology of the characters, it didn't fit with any of those things. And in fact, it contradicted a lot of their actions. That is a badly implemented aspect. And why did Feist put it in? I suppose we could ask him directly. But in reading it, we can sort of hypothesize that, well, if they had all been chauvinistic assholes, then maybe we wouldn't have seen them as the heroic characters that we wanted to see them, that he wanted us to see them as. And that is the issue. When we look at Alien, the film, a male character in the script, they cast a female actor to play Ripley. Ripley was originally written as a man. The dialogue was a man's dialogue. But Ripley, they cast Sigourney Weaver, and about all they changed were pronoun references. That was it. If that was done today, quite a lot of people would say, oh, well, this is just wokeness, or this is just inclusion gone mad, or why do they have to bring modern politics into it? Why couldn't they have just kept it a man? And again, it's not that the thing in and of itself is an issue. It's when we see a lot of modern narratives that it has been poorly handled or clumsily handled. That is the issue, not the thing itself. We are fine with multiple examples of gender swapping, race swapping, alterations and things not being faithful, all of these things. We are fine with all of them in so many different circumstances. But when it is done badly, that is when we isolate it and we look at that superficial thing, this thing that has been done badly, and we blame the thing itself, not its implementation, which is a flaw in our reasoning and approach to critique. So it's not saying that these things are good. They're not. They are a thing. But how it has been implemented can be really important. So it's not the inclusion of these things. It's how they have been included. And that is a very significant distinction. And you mightn't think that it's a significant distinction, but it is. The second thread of there shouldn't be modern politics in fiction that makes me really, really uneasy is why? Why shouldn't fiction, why shouldn't narrative, why shouldn't film and television engage with these things? Are we now so entrenched in positions that we are dictating to creatives, to authors, to writers, what they should and should not write? This is a censorship issue. And if you say there shouldn't be these things, right, so you've decided that there shouldn't be politics. Someone else might decide that there shouldn't be sex. Someone else could decide that there shouldn't be violence. And if we impose that on authors, if we impose that on writers, that's censorship. Do not do that. Authors should not do that. You should not write that. Are we really, really championing the cause of censorship of creativity? Because it makes me really uneasy when I hear people say, you should not write these things. You should only write the things that are socially acceptable, because that is the tyranny of censorship. And all over YouTube, there was a huge furor over the copyright and license holder of the Roald Dahl books employing editors to come in and update and modernize the language into something more suitable, they felt, for a modern children's audience. This is censorship gone crazy, was the cry. And yet we're all perfectly happy with, well, they shouldn't bring modern politics in. So one censorship is bad, but the other type of censorship is perfectly fine. And you go, and if that's how you feel, that is how you feel. But at least be consistent in the application of, yes, I am pro censorship, or no, I am not pro censorship. Be consistent. People championing free speech. You shouldn't censor what I have to say. Okay, then why are you attempting to say what authors and writers should or should not say? Are you really going to make that argument? Are you somehow above the same laws and cultural norms that you expect everyone else to obey? That is what is so frustrating. And so that whole argument about politics being in modern narratives, that is not the issue. Never has been, never will be. Milton's Paradise Lost has a lot of political commentary in it. Dante's Divine Comedy, look at who he meets in hell, and then compare that to the history of the time in which he was living. That is social and political commentary, right smack bang in the middle of Dante's Inferno, in the Divine Comedy. It's in the middle of Milton's Paradise Lost. It's in Shakespeare. It's in the Odyssey. Why is Athena the patron of Odysseus and not Hermes? Because it was politically expedient to flatter the Athenians, catering to the contemporary audience. This is not a new phenomenon. And because of that, when people say something like, there shouldn't be modern politics in fiction, I have to stop myself from rolling my eyes. And the thing is, I genuinely believe when people say that, they don't realize what the ramifications of what they are saying actually is. They don't understand what those ramifications are. That in saying something like that, it is a pro-censorship stance, that it denies the history of literature, and that in writing almost anything, depending on audience, you can twist that into a political, ideological, or socioeconomic statement. You can. That's why I find that particular statement so annoying and egregious. Not that I read this thing, it had this thing in it, and I didn't like it. You're like, fine. Quite often, it's the expression of the thing that you didn't enjoy, not the fact that it was there. It was how it was done. And if someone said, I didn't enjoy how this was done in the novel, I'm like, yeah, fine. Work away. No one can gainsay that. That's about how you felt about it. Oh, the author shouldn't have included this thing because it was badly done. They should have done something different. Okay, that's an evaluative judgment. There's going to be evidence for it. Grand, work away. Authors shouldn't include politics. No, different statement means different things, has completely different connotations, and is unsupportable and unsustainable as an argument about literature. It just isn't. You can't sustain it. The next one I want to talk about is people saying fiction shouldn't be didactic. Fiction shouldn't be about teaching. Fiction shouldn't be forcing the author's opinions into the face of the reader. Why not? Certainly not all fiction should do it, because that would reduce all fiction to, morality plays, parables, fables, thought experiments. We like variety. But why, in all of creation, shouldn't some authors do this sometimes? And again, quite often, it's not that a didactic book, the didacticism is bad. If it has been poorly implemented, then we can go, oh, well, it was a bit rough and ready. It was too obvious that that's what this thing was, and it wasn't intended to be that thing. But again, look at 1984, Fahrenheit 451, Brave New World. 3 dystopian Western classics. Those are heavily didactic books. They don't both sides an argument. They aren't fair and balanced. They are heavy criticisms in a political, ideological, and sociological way about certain systems. And they show how those systems are bad. They are didactic. Morality plays, the things that gained massive popularity in Europe in the 15th and 16th century, and have been around there ever since. But again, I suppose they're a new invention because, wait, no, the Romans and the Greeks also had heavily didactic morality plays. Right, so they've been around for a couple of thousand years, but suddenly now, didacticism in fiction is not allowed. Again, you can wheel out the censorship argument. Who are you to say what authors are and are not allowed to write about, what they want to do? There's a whole censorship argument here about why are we dictating to authors how they're allowed to express their stories? We personally may not enjoy didactic stories. Fine. But that doesn't give us the right to say, well, no one should write them. That's ridiculous. And I have heard people who really should know better make statements like this. The author shouldn't do that. No. They're perfectly entitled to do that. If it is done badly, yeah, we can criticize that aspect. The didacticism in this was too blunt. It was poorly done. Congratulations. You've started engaging with actual criticism instead of pointing at a thing and go, oh, it's because there was a message to it that they were trying to teach us, and this is just the author's thoughts on something. Yeah, thought experiments. These are all perfectly acceptable, perfectly normal. And some of them are perfectly wonderful examples of narrative, of parables. Oh, well, they're didactic. We shouldn't have those. No, of course you can have parables. Oh, well, I'm only talking about novels. Well, apart from, the dystopian ones, which were explicitly looking at that, or, some of the science fiction ones, which are exploring that concept to hammer home to the reader why this thing is bad, a didactic message. We make exceptions for these things because quite often we feel they were well done. I was engaged. I was interested. And again, that's fine if we enjoy it. And if we don't enjoy it, it's not because the thing was didactic. Usually, it is because the didacticism was poorly implemented. And again, someone saying, I didn't enjoy how this was done, or I think this was poorly implemented, you go, there's something that we can talk about. There's something that we can discuss. But saying it shouldn't be didactic, fiction shouldn't be didactic, is just dumb. And it makes the person saying this look ignorant and dismissive of huge swathes, not only of literary history, thousands of years of narrative, but it makes them look ignorant of other genres. Children's literature, huge swathes of young children's literature is meant to be didactic. Oh well, when I was talking about novels, and I was talking about adult novels, and I was talking about adult novels in a specific genre. You, that's not what you said. Oh well, that's what I meant. And this is what I mean about these discussions. The reason they often devolve into acrimony is because someone has in their head, this is what I mean, but it's not what they say. And that's why I am talking about this. Because again, is the inclusion of a particular moral or religious or ideological or political or socioeconomic issue that is the view of the author that they are trying to transmit, is it the mere presence and inclusion of that that's the problem? Or maybe, potentially, possibly, perhaps, and I might be going out on a limb here, it's the fact that it was badly done is the issue. That we don't mind when it is integrated into something. But if it is poorly integrated, then it can feel clumsy. It can feel blunt. It can feel obvious and overt and is not engaging us and immersing us. And that was what we wanted. So again, like there shouldn't be modern politics and fantasy, fiction shouldn't be didactic. Both of those statements are rubbish. They're silly, they're stupid, they're contradictory. And even if you don't enjoy that type of thing, we are well aware that we are not the only reader in the world. And therefore, universalizing our preference and trying to impose it onto other people and authors is an unsustainable argument. And that ties into the last thing, which is the author shouldn't insert their personal politics, opinion, or point of view into the story. Why not? Seriously, why not? It might be we don't enjoy that, or we didn't want to know that, or we aren't interested in it. Those are all absolutely fine. But that is not justification and reason to say that no author should do that. Particularly if, again, potentially, out on a limb here, the major reason we object to it is it seems to be done poorly. And like all of these things, it is a balance between what a particular author has done and what that individual reader has picked up. Because no author can control how a reader reads and responds to the text. They just can't. And if the author is trying to explore X thing and the reader does not want to read that, does not want to engage with it, that reader's not going to enjoy it. But that doesn't mean that the author shouldn't do X thing. That's a different argument. And it's moving away from what our preferences are or how we reacted to a specific book or a specific film or a specific TV show. That wasn't what we wanted. That wasn't what engages us. That isn't what immerses us. We can have all of those discussions. I didn't think it was done well because it seemed very obvious that the focus was on that thing rather than this thing. Again, we can talk then about whether or not that reflects the majority of what the text was doing, how it was narrated to us, all of those different things. There are brilliant discussions to be had. But to point blank say, you shouldn't include politics or modern politics or identity politics, that books shouldn't be didactic, narratives shouldn't be didactic, and that authors should not interject their personal views, Those are all arguments for censorship. Those are all arguments for saying, no, I have decided that this is appropriate for you to write about. That's not how literature works. It's not how art works. It's not how narrative works. It's not how it has ever worked. An argument, this may have been commercially more successful if, you go, right, actually framing an argument to discuss. Excellent. They shouldn't have done that. Why? The question why is so important to all of this. And I'm sorry if this comes across as a bit ranty. I just, over the past 2 weeks, I have seen some very intelligent people say some incredibly stupid things. People who really should know better. And the thing is, I don't think they were thinking about it from that perspective. They were trying to talk about it in general, and they were saying, oh, and this is one of the reasons why these books get criticized. Maybe that's what they were thinking. But what they ended up saying was authors shouldn't write these books. Authors shouldn't include this. Authors shouldn't include that. And when the language of an argument turns to that, A, who are you to dictate to the rest of the world what should or should not be in narrative in general? B, these are all arguments about censorship. And these are all pro-censorship arguments. I can't get behind those. And so when we talk about this, I think there are ways to have really productive discussions about the inclusion of politics or an author's view or the didacticism of text. There are really interesting things that we can talk about and discuss. And we can start evaluating whether it was done well, whether it was done poorly, whether it harmed the overall trajectory of the narrative, whether it enhanced it, whether it tied in with themes, or whether it ran against the themes, contrary to the themes. There are really interesting discussions that we can have about this. But these point blank, blunt statements are usually dumb. Like, you can't get around that. And if someone says, oh, well, I prefer books like this, so authors shouldn't do that, you acknowledge in the first part it's personal preference, and then you project it onto a universal rule of behavior and censorship of authors without any awareness that personal preference is not, or should not at least, be the universal guide for everyone else's behavior. Can you tell I've had a rough week? Anyway, hopefully this is of interest. Thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and I'll see you in the next one.